Hello everybody and welcome to this Brandwatch hosted webinar, showing social intelligence across the business, beyond marketing use cases for social insights. My name is Ruxandra and I'm the Influencer Manager here at Brandwatch, and I will be hosting this webinar. I am joined by Dr. Liz Gross, Social Media and Market Research Strategist at Great Lakes Educational Loan Services, and by Ron Shevling, Director of Research at Cornerstone Advisors. Today, we'll be discussing how social can contribute to business success, the most efficient ways of activating social insights, and how they can help companies make smarter business decisions, followed by some non-marketing use cases for social insights. Don't be shy, we love your participation, so you can tweet with the hashtag BrandwatchTips or straight to our handle, which is at Brandwatch, and ask questions and get involved as we're going along. Also, we'll be recording this webinar, so if you're interested in watching the video afterwards, we'll be sending this round. So just before we start, here's a little bit about us. Brandwatch is one of the world's leading social intelligence platforms, gathering millions of online conversations every day in 44 languages, analyzing them, and empowering over 1,200 clients to make data-driven business decisions. And now we'll kick off with some quick introductions from Ron and Liz, and then we're going to get to the meat of the webinar, which is our Q&A session. Now, Liz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Gross, and by day, I am managing the social media and the market research programs, both at Great Lakes. We're a higher education company, and one of our main businesses is serving about 8 million federal student loans in the United States. I'm also a member of the faculty at Higher Ed Experts, which is an online school for higher education professionals to work on their skills in digital marketing. If you want to find out some more information about me, you can check out some past presentations I've done at the Social Media Strategies Summit or the AMA Higher Education Symposium. I've also got some writing out there that's accessible. There's a chapter in the new issue of Student Engaging the Digital Generation about student engagement through digital data, if there's any higher education folks out there. And then also in the Direct Marketing Analytics Journal this year, I published Making Metrics Matter, Translating Social Media Analytics for Executives. So if there's something not specific to social listening you want to learn about, I've probably got something out there you can check out, or find me on Twitter or my website, lizgross.net.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Liz. Now, Ron, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, thanks a lot. Hi, Ron Shevlin here. I'm the Director of Research at Cornerstone Advisors. We're a consulting firm serving the mid-sized bank and credit union market here in the U.S. I've been with Cornerstone about a year and a half. Prior to that, I spent about 16 years in the analyst business with IT Group, focusing in the bank market, and before that with Forrester Research. And I've also been writing a blog called Snarketing for the past 10 years or so, which is now being published on thefinancialbrand.com. And last year published a book called Smarter Bank to help the industry deal with all the technology change that's going on in the industry. So that's a little bit about me.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Ron. And now let's dive in straight into the questions. So the first thing, which I think is probably worth framing the entire conversation around, is to what extent do you think social can contribute to business success? Liz, would you like to go first?
All right, who do you want to take a stab at it first? So honestly, when you say to what extent, I think the possibilities are endless as long as you have somebody in a role that both understands all of the use cases for social as well as the strategic needs of the business. So I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time today talking about research, so you can learn about products, customers, different business segments or trends. But even beyond that, I think social has an important role in risk management and reputation management. It can have a very important role in customer support, competitive intelligence, and for an individual that contributes to a business's success, I think it can also be incredibly important for professional development. You can organize your social networks very easily to find thought leaders and influential publications and make sure what matters to you and your profession and your industry is coming right at you instead of spending all day browsing LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. So we could talk about this for an hour, but I really think it's about understanding all the possibilities in social as well as what your specific business needs and then finding the good fit.
Awesome. Anything you'd like to add to that, Ron?
Yeah, I would echo what Liz says, and I think the real question is, to what extent do you want it to contribute to your business success? Because I think the real test is how committed you are to using and utilizing social media, social channels, and so forth, and social data to accomplish business goals and strategic goals. So I think the biggest issue that most firms have that I run into is not that they don't know to what extent social can contribute, but that they're not committed enough to using social to accomplish their business objectives.
Cool, I see that makes a lot of sense. But now let's just go a bit deeper into the conversation. So at Brandwatch, we are big supporters of pairing traditional solicited survey data and layering it with social data and other data sets. What benefits do you see in getting social into the market research mix? Ron, would you like to go first this time?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I think one of the biggest benefits of getting social into the market research mix is diversifying the types of data that are being collected and analyzed for the market research purposes. I think traditional market research is very focused on survey data, which often has a serious time lag, and is also very dependent upon the answers and questions, the way they're framed, and the answers that are posed. So I think social adds a new aspect to this, both from a timeliness perspective in terms of being able to glean and capture a lot of data in a much more real-time type of fashion, as well as adding a different type of data type to the mix, often more sentiment-related data, as well as perhaps more behavioral data in addition to a lot of the attitudinal and response data that's being captured from the traditional market research efforts. So I think, time and diversification of timeliness and diversification of data types are two of the biggest benefits that I've seen a lot of institutions gain from getting social into the market research mix.
I see. Is there anything you'd like to add, Liz?
Well, I definitely echo that. I believe adding social can increase your speed to insights. It's definitely faster than many traditional research methods. I'd also say that it is potentially, depending on your research methods, less biased because you are looking at, in many cases, unprompted opinions and attitudes of individuals rather than someone responding to questions on a survey or in an interview. You also can get a massive sample size on a variety of topics without a lot of on-the-ground work or recruitment. And then finally, one of the things I love about social data coming into market research is that you can both be very directed in your analysis or you can be extremely exploratory with a large data set. So once you gather your data, you're not necessarily tied to a specific methodology or research question if you want to look at other possibilities.
Hey Liz, I don't want to get into any arguments or fights with you, but I think.
Ooh, let's go at it, Ron.
Yeah, because I'm a little surprised to hear you talk about the bias. I mean, certainly there's a potential for a lot of bias in normal traditional surveying approaches, but from a social perspective, where we've got no real clue as to what the underlying demographics of the contributors in the social sphere are, I'm afraid that there's potentially more bias because we don't know what the total population is and can't control for that in the mix. So I'm a little more scared that that social adds more bias versus less.
I would like to amend my response then. I would say potentially less response bias.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. You can come up with a very, very skewed sample, particularly those who are not using social are not going to be represented in your research. You're absolutely right.
But where I would echo, and do support your comments 100%, is that I think one of the biggest weaknesses in traditional market research is I think it's even the lack of recognition among a lot of providers and purveyors of research that they don't understand that there's a lot of bias in the types of questions and responses that are the way the surveys are being framed. So you're getting a much more direct response from the consumer or from the customer, whoever it might be, unfettered by the types of questions and prompts that you're doing. So from that bias perspective or elimination of bias, I think social is a huge improvement over a lot of traditional research efforts.
Yep, I would agree with you as far as, audience demographics and things like that. You could find a bias, but at least you're not risking wording your question wrong to prompt a biased response, which is nice.
Absolutely, loads of great points there. Now moving on to the next question. We're asking, how is social intelligence changing the market research industry? And I would love your thoughts on this, Liz.
Sure. Well, so I think that researchers, just like everybody else in business today, need to start getting a better understanding of the customer and really expand the ways we are gathering that voice of customer data. And one of the nice things about social intelligence is it's easier for the customer to tell you how they talk about topics, what words they use, where they talk about them, so that there's less control on the researcher's end of the language that is being used or the location of a focus group or the sample of the survey. So I think it's interesting there that you're getting a lot more access to customers in the environment that they're putting themselves in, rather than trying to create some other sort of research environment. I also think social intelligence is going to push a lot of researchers to need to turn results around faster, because colleagues with skills in social consumer insights are going to be setting that bar really high for how fast they can extract insights from a large data set. And then kind of looking back at the industry as a whole, I think we're going to see some time, I think we're in it right now, where companies really need to develop a lot of social intelligence expertise within their business, or go to a very small boutique firm, because there's a lot of mainstream market research firms, specifically if you're looking at industry-specific firms, that haven't adopted social intelligence methodologies yet. So if that's a type of insight that's important to the business, it might be opening up new opportunities for either internal expertise or for working with very specifically qualified researchers.
Perfect, that's great. Thanks a lot, Liz. And then we often talk about the fact that we're living in the age of the customer, and we call it that because businesses are thinking about the customers first and foremost. Product development, branding, so much of what businesses do today is driven by customers. We think that the influence of customers has shifted the flow of power. How do you think businesses can make this shift work to their advantage? Ron, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I have to just tell you right off the bat, I'm a little cynical about the notion of the age of the customer. I think it's been the year of the customer every year for the past 10 or 15 years, so I get a little cynical about that. But, I do think to a certain extent this idea of the flow or the shift of power is a bit overstated, and if you need any proof of that, go try and buy a car. You get a little bit more leveraging power or negotiating power in, let's say, a financial services environment. But it's not like you have the total power in that relationship. I think when you take a step back, what's really happened is that there is simply more consumers have more access to data, ease of getting to that data, which is also very important, and to a certain extent, ease of switching and ease of buying. If 20 years ago you drove 25 miles to go to the mall to get something, and didn't see exactly what you wanted, you'd probably be more likely to settle for what they had there, versus today where you can simply shop online, check all the prices, and do that. So there's not only more access to the data, but easier to choose between various providers, and I think that's what characterizes the shift of power to a certain extent. So how do businesses make this shift work to their advantage? I think this really comes down to a very fundamental change and shift in the nature of marketing in particular, and communications with prospects and customers. If I look at the old world of marketing, I think it's very much driven by the concept of persuasion, the idea that we're trying to persuade somebody to do business with you, persuade them that you are the better provider. And I think the new paradigm is more about engagement and engaging with somebody, helping them make the smart choice. So rather than treating data as something we've got and you don't as the customer. It's more about transparency and providing them with the data to help them make the smart choice. And there are actually going to be instances where, and I see this a lot, especially in the banking and financial services world, where another provider may actually be a better choice for a particular customer, but somebody who's built the trust with that particular provider that they're talking to, they're just as likely to go with them. So I think how businesses make this shift work to their advantage is not by hiding data or treating data as something that they've got and others don't, but being more transparent about how the data is used in the sales and marketing process, and shifting from a mentality of persuasion to engagement.
Do you agree, Liz?
I absolutely do. I love Ron's comments on how data transparency can work to the business's advantage. At the tail end of that, when he said switching to engagement, I think, customers feel powerful in many cases now because they feel they have a loudspeaker that they can put out to the world. And I think businesses can take advantage of that because they can now interact with their customers easier. They can, instead of just looking at what customers are saying about them, they can ask for directed feedback, knowing that many of the customers feel like it's the business's job to listen. So you can be more directed in asking for feedback, get that feedback really quickly, be transparent with your customers about any changes you've been making based on their feedback, and then they're probably going to give you another round of unsolicited feedback in addition to that. So your feedback loop can be much faster, and customers feeling empowered, you can feed that so that they give you the information you need to improve your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually brings us to our next discussion point, which is around the fact that customers are better informed than ever before. And for the majority of people, making a purchase without first checking reviews and prices online is unthinkable. Consumers also know they are in a stronger position now. So do you think this is a threat or an opportunity for brands? Liz?
I think that depends on the brand. I believe it is an opportunity for brands that are truly committed to customer experience that will allow them to shine. We see this with companies like JetBlue, whose folks, they're an airline. People are supposed to hate airlines, but they love them on social because they are committed to empowering their customer and making the customer experience positive. Now, brands that are adverse to change or those that don't understand the customer experience are likely going to see this as a threat. And I think over time we will see some brands fall and fail if they don't adapt to this new environment. But all of that is specific to your industry, your customer base, where you're located, the type of service you provide. So I think it's two sides of the same coin. I definitely think it's an opportunity for a brand that wants to harness it.
What do you think, Ron?
Oh, I couldn't agree more with Liz on this one. I think she kind of really nailed it. I think it's not about Liz and I sitting here answering this question. I think, as she points out, it's really about the individual brands and companies and how they answer this question. And as Liz said, if they sit there and answer and say, yes, customer empowerment is a threat, that says a lot about their culture and their marketing approach and how they're going to use social channels and social data, versus companies, and like one that just immediately comes to mind in financial services is USAA, which would think of customer empowerment or member empowerment as much more as an opportunity than a threat, and that speaks a lot to sort of how they design everything around their business and use social to gather data and insights. I think Liz kind of nails it. It's really about how the company or the brand answers this question that says a lot about how they're going to react to the new environment.
That's really interesting. The way I see it, the age of the customer is a huge opportunity to turn this threat into opportunities more than anything else. But however, there are some challenges to face internally, and this actually brings us to our next question. So there are some departments and some personalities that are more comfortable with social data and analytics than others, and there can be resistance to overcome, and this is often a challenge identified by our clients. Is this something you have come across, and what advice would you give to those struggling with this issue? Ron, would you like to go first this time?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a pretty big problem, especially in a lot of analytics groups. I think a lot of folks looking outside of marketing would think that the analytics groups would welcome a lot of this social data and be all on top of it and utilizing it. But I think the reality is that it's really the other way around, is that not that they feel necessarily threatened by social data, but that they really don't know how to incorporate social data into predictive models. For 30 years or so, whatever it might be, they've been using demographic data and maybe purchase data and other hard quantitative data to drive predictive models, whether it's segmentation or propensity models, whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden you say, hey, we've got this really cool data that we've gathered from our social channels. And I don't think they necessarily want to say, well, we've got no clue what to do with it, but in effect, that's really what they're saying, is we have no clue how to incorporate that data. So I think there's a learning curve. It's not simply about just, analyzing a lot of data, but in terms of using it for predictive purposes, is in finding a bridge to figuring out how do existing analytic and predictive models, how can they incorporate a new type of data source coming from the social channels. So this is not an easy one to fix, because we're talking about some really, really smart people with years and years of experience, and now we're telling them that, oh yeah, we think we've got this really cool thing called social data, and we don't know on the social side necessarily, or in the other parts of marketing, how to incorporate this into the analytic models, and we're just throwing it over the transom figure, thinking that they do. So there's some work to be done in how to really incorporate a lot of this stuff into the predictive work. And I don't know if there's any easy answer to that. I think it just requires some work and experimentation, and probably some outside third-party help to work with both groups, those that are collecting the data and those that are doing the modeling.
Yeah, absolutely. In this case, I think creating a common language across the organization and educating and training your staff is also very important. Liz, would you like to add anything to this?
Sure. I have some firsthand experience with this in my organization. They hired me about 4 years ago as the person to quote unquote do social. So kudos to them for knowing we needed to figure that out, but there wasn't really a roadmap for what that would mean other than engaging with customers. So there's still some healthy skepticism at some levels within the organization, although there are also some champions all the way up to the executive level. But I'm continuing to see this grow. And just last month, a chief executive picked up the phone and he asked me if I could do some of that online research for him. That was similar to something I'd shown him previously as a proof of concept for a market assessment and customer profiling that I did with Brandwatch. So this is a man that's in his 50s or 60s. He doesn't use social in his daily life. He is a tried and true business and finance man, but he's seen me present examples of the results of social products that are relevant to the business in a variety of venues. And it was the results and the insights that hooked him on it. He wants more of that. He doesn't want to know how Boolean works or how I structure my queries and tags and categories. He just wants the relevant insights. So I think one of the biggest ways to overcome this challenge, especially with some senior stakeholders, is not to get bogged down into the details of how you're gathering and analyzing social data. Your analytics team is going to want to know that, but senior stakeholders want to know the results that are relevant to the business. And if you stick with that, I think you will have a clearer path to gaining buy-in for social data in the organization.
Amazing, that's great advice. Thank you, Liz. And then, interestingly, independent analyst research firm Gartner reports that 89% of business leaders expect the customer experience to be the primary brand differentiator. Improving customer experience starts with listening to customer feedback, criticism, or needs, and using that information to make an impact. Can you please share some recent examples of brands using the voice of the customer to improve their services and the customer experience? We'll go to Ron. on the
Oh,
same time. Okay.
I'll let Liz take the first shot. Go ahead.
All right. So I don't have high-profile examples. I have examples that I've experienced or that I've been involved with. One, I am really, really impressed with the luggage company Tom Bin. They're based in Seattle in the U.S. and I've been a customer of theirs for about a year now, and I feel like they are one of the most customer-centric companies I have ever worked with. And all I do is buy stuff from them. They don't pay me to work with them. I pay them. They have forums on their website, they interact on social, and they use their feedback from their customers to choose the fabrics and the colors and the designs of all of their new products. So they do not ever launch a travel bag or accessory that their customers don't want. And that is evidenced by the fact that pretty much everything sells out as soon as they come out with a new product. So I'm really excited about what they're doing. No one uses them as examples in any of the talks I've seen, but they're a small customer-focused company. They know their segment, and they own that segment. One that I was involved in is with my company. So we service student loans, and for the most part, we are working on education and customer service. But since we've been on social for the last 4 years, we've started to see more feedback from our customers saying that the moment they pay off their student loan should be a really celebratory experience for them, but it's kind of a letdown because they're just done and we send them a form letter and we never want them to come back. So we actually took their feedback and we created what we call the paid in full party. So now when someone has paid off their loan and they log into our website, they see an animated GIF of people dancing and confetti, and it's saying, congratulations, you paid off your loan, and they can share that on social, and people share that every single day. So it's just one nice way to end the customer journey with a happy moment for something that might have taken 10, 15, 20 years to accomplish. And we only did that because our customers were telling us that we were missing out on that opportunity.
Perfect. And then in terms of using insights and challenges people are facing on this side, using insights to drive customer loyalty and become a customer-centric brand is often a challenge for businesses. What advice would you give to companies that are struggling to place customers at the heart of the business, Ron?
So this is a tough question because you worded it as, what advice would you give to businesses struggling? And the problem is you never give advice to businesses. You give advice to particular individuals within the business. So the question, I think, really comes down to who's asking for this advice. And let's say we're talking to, let's say a chief marketing officer who feels that in his or her organization, customers aren't at the heart of the business. So, first question is, why not? Has it has something to do with the culture, that the culture is more financial driven or sales driven or manufacturing or product driven, and what's driving that? Is there I see, I work with a lot of banks, and I don't think any of them would ever tell you that their customers aren't at the heart of their business. And yet, if you talk to a lot of people at the front line or in marketing, they'd say, no, there's no way. We're financial driven, and we've got an executive team that's come all out of either lending, underwriting, or the financial organization, and they're anything but customer centric. So the first first challenge here is really identifying why aren't customers at the heart of the business, and being really honest about that. In figuring out, is there something cultural about it, and recognizing that simply waving this is what kind of really drives me nuts in a lot of organizations where I see marketing waving the banner of we need to be more customer centric, and the management team, if they're not amenable to that, don't understand what does that mean in terms of what we have to do differently, what impact is it going to have. And if the organization's already fairly successful with nice growth rates and customer growth and retention and sales, then the question really begs the question, why would we change if we're not, customers aren't at the heart of the business today, but we're doing well? Why would we change? So a lot of this, comes down to really doing some serious self-introspection and figuring out exactly what the problem is, where the barriers are, who the barriers are, and making a business case, not an emotional case. Because it's really going to be easy for management team to just go, yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to have customers at the heart of the business, and when the meeting's over, it's business as usual. So it really has to be about making a business case for this, and I think to a certain extent treating it as almost a project or initiative to do some experimentation and see what works and how the business can be improved. So this is not an easy one to address because there are so many barriers to getting there. But simply waving the flag of customer centricity, I think, gets you nowhere.
I completely agree. And then from your personal experience or any interesting use cases you've come across, what are the most efficient ways of activating social insights, Liz?
So for me, it's really been about making all of our social insights and voice of customer data visible and making sure it's visible to the right people. So I'm speaking from a company that doesn't really have a lot of formal voice of customer social insight structures in place. It definitely didn't when I arrived here, but we approach it from a variety of different ways. So visibility might mean there's a customer experience committee that needs to see this information and allow it to impact their decisions. It might even just be an email listserv. That's where we started, and that list has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's a Friday blast of what we've been seeing on social media, and I think people would be sad if we stopped it now. Even though it might not be the most efficient way to share, it's been a way for people to feel like they have a pulse on the business. I work for a company that has 6 different locations, so this doesn't work for us, but if you're in a company that has one primary location, it might be useful to have some sort of a display, physical display, showing what you're finding from social, whether that's a high-tech or a low-tech display. So I think these are all places that you can start if you don't already have voice of customer structures built into the company. I think people just need to see what are you finding and how could we use it, and just find whoever might be receptive to that information that can do something with it to impact the business.
Mm-hmm. Now, moving on to the next question, Ron, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. What are the challenges of implementing voice of the customer programs?
Now, we could probably spend 45 minutes on this question alone. So a couple of ones that I think kind of really pop to the top of the stack from a challenges perspective is, number one, tying the voice of the customer program to business process change and bottom line results. I think too often it sounds like the right thing to do, to let's capture the voice of the customer, but without a real clear understanding and impact for how is this data going to be used, how is it going to be disseminated, how is it going to drive process change, how is it going to drive, and very importantly, rewards and incentives. I think too many organizations, and this is where I'm going to get shot down by a lot of folks out there, but well, I'll put it out there for you anyway. I think Net Promoter Score has been the biggest bunch of management snake oil that has ever been sold into business. The idea that you can ask consumers to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely they are to refer you, and then treat that as a voice of the customer program is just, to me, such amazing amount of nonsense, especially when you consider that consumers don't really always do what they say they're going to do anyway. So there's a huge disconnect, I think, with a lot of voice of the customer programs between the process of collecting data and how that data is getting used in the business. The second big challenge, before I kind of hand over to Liz, is I think that there's too much of an emphasis in the voice of the customer on the actual voice of the customer. That is, too much of a reliance on what they say versus what they do. And as somebody who's been doing market research for 20 years, I really have come to the conclusion that asking consumers what they think is getting to be an incredible waste of time. I'm much more interested in understanding what they did more so than what they say they did or what they're thinking about. So I think one of the second challenge before I throw it to Liz is not only number one is the tying it to business change and results, but number two is over-reliance on surveys versus collecting behavioral data.
I want to say amen to Ron because I don't measure Net Promoter Score either. I work in a business that actually can't be referred for a lot of our business lines, so it is not applicable for us. You had a lot of great stuff in there. I think tying it to the business is so important because VOC and ROI, the connection might not be immediately apparent, and if you can draw that line, that will be really helpful. I think another challenge is that there's still some organizations that lack research expertise. So it can be hard to either get a good qualified team together or to find the right business partner to build that in for you. And another challenge, again, we could list challenges all day if we'd like. That's why it's fun work, because it's hard. Voice of customer cannot work well in a silo. It has to be an initiative that breaks across organizational barriers, that impacts decisions and strategy, and making those changes in a business of any meaningful size is always hard, whether it's voice of customer or not. So I don't think something's worth doing unless it's hard. That's why I like doing this work.
Thank you so much. I actually want to remind you, audience, that we'll be starting our audience Q&A in a minute. So if you have any questions, please tweet them to us or write them in the chat box. And now we're going to move on to the last question you got for today, which is, do you have any particular examples of how social insights can be used beyond the marketing department to support business growth? Ron, would you like to go first?
Who's going first? Me?
Yeah, if that's okay with you.
Oh, sure. I think from my perspective that I'm so focused in marketing that really answering the question of how social insights are being used beyond marketing is a bit of a challenge for me. But especially, I will say this, in the financial, clearly in the customer service area, there's a lot of opportunity. But what I'll say is, and this is very, I apologize to everyone out there who's not in financial services, since this is pretty financial services specific response, but especially around way a lot of firms are experimenting with using social insights from a risk management and loan underwriting perspective. And probably Liz could probably talk a lot more about that too if she's doing work in that area. But while I still think that that's very experimental, I think it's going a long way to how financial institutions and credit providers and credit data providers as well are using social data to help drive risk and underwriting decisions. And I think that's one of the key areas I'm seeing in financial services on how social insights are being used beyond marketing.
I've got a couple kind of off-the-wall ones. One, I also work in a financial services organization which is has many compliance requirements on it, and one of those is vendor management. We work with hundreds of vendors and we have vendor management plans in place, but our folks have found that using social listening for vendor management can help us get information about any particular risks our vendors are facing faster than from any other source. So we've got Brandwatch queries set up to manage a select list of vendors to make sure we know what's being talked about them in regards to, say, a security breach or a lawsuit or anything like that. That's something that legal has loved using social insights for. Another actually is for human resources and recruitment. We have some groups that really haven't been touched from an HR perspective in a lot of years, and they were kind of thinking that their job titling schemas and job descriptions were a little outdated and not attracting the applicants they wanted. So they came to my group and asked if we could do a quick search for what job titles were being used in the industry, and everyone posts jobs on social, so that was literally a 30-minute project for us, and they were able to retitle employees for ways that better match the industry without having to go to an HR organization and pay for a report or anything like that. So two sort of off-the-wall things that both happened this year that we weren't expecting, but were pretty valuable to different parts of our business.
Perfect. Some great examples right here, and lots to learn from them. We're actually gonna move on to our Q&A portion right now. If we don't have time to answer your question during the webinar, we'll make sure we follow up with you afterwards. So our first question is, can social insights be used to measure business ROI? Liz, would you like to take this one?
A real quick, simple question for Q&A. So, Ron had his soapbox moment on Net Promoter Score. I'm going to take my soapbox moment on ROI. Regardless of what people say in any social media presentation about return on influence or return on whatever, I'm a firm believer that ROI is return on investment, and investments are measured in dollars. And dollars come from customers that purchase products. So if your social insights program is supporting a business where a customer purchases a product and it's integrated with your CRM so you can track the implication of anything in social on purchasing behavior, then yes, you can measure business ROI. However, to my knowledge, like 3% of businesses are doing that. So if you haven't done that, you can't measure ROI in the pure sense, which is dollars. You can, however, likely be able to correlate behaviors of a particular customer segment to what you find with social insights, and that might be enough for your business. But if you haven't integrated social data into the systems that measure revenue, then you can't truly measure ROI, in my opinion, and you just need to be able to explain that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liz, for answering. And then we have collecting the voice of the customer involves looking at a variety of data sources. And which do you think are the most reliable and insightful ones? Would you like to take this one, Ron?
Sure. I think it's a bit of a hard question to answer because you say which are most useful, and I think the question becomes, well, useful for what purpose? If it's understanding past behavior and what happened and why, then I might argue that actually looking at behavioral data is a whole lot more important. If it's understanding future needs, then past behavior may not be the best source, and there might be something else. So I find it hard to answer that question without putting it in the context of what question are we, trying to answer with the data.
I see. Well, we're actually coming to the end of the time for this webinar, but we will make sure we follow up with any questions that haven't been answered, and also with the recording, like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Liz and Ron, for joining, and everyone else for tuning in.
Thanks, it's been fun.
Thank you.